People love change. People love change more than maybe anything else. People love change because if we didn't love change, there would be no fashion industry. There would be no restaurant industry. There would be no travel industry. People love change that they are able to influence, that they have the ability to shape and be a part of. If you want to change the culture because you're seeing a gap between your desired state culturally and your current state culturally, then you need to involve the people who are going to need to help you make that change, or else you'll fail because it's just another bright, shiny thing from a consultant that means nothing on the impact of the people on the floor.
Welcome back to the Frontline Leadership Podcast, where we help frontline leaders become professional leaders who transform their business bottom lines in the process. I'm your host, Craig Coyle, former Apache helicopter pilot, aerospace leader, and founder of Operation Lead. Today's guest has spent years inside the manufacturing world, not only on the production floor, but in the conversations that happen around it. He's been a manufacturer himself. He's been a coach, a facilitator, a connector, a podcast host. Jim Mayer has had a front row seat to what separates manufacturing organizations that build something worth being proud of to those that quietly fall apart from the inside. He's the founder of the Manufacturing Connector and host of the Manufacturing Culture Podcast, alongside several other industrial podcasts. And today, we're going to use his perspective to do something I think is long overdue on this show. Slow down and get clear on what culture actually is, where it lives, and who actually builds it. Here's my conversation with Jim Mayer. Well, Jim, in a reversal of roles, I can't say this is familiar territory for you. It certainly isn't for me, but now I get to say, welcome to the Frontline Leadership Podcast. How you doing?
That's awesome, man. I'm doing well. Yeah, this is wild. This is the third time you and I have recorded something. And it's wild to be on this side.
I love it. I love it. You know, there's so many times at trade shows and stuff, we've had conversations and I've just thought, man, I just wish we could hit record on this, because the depth of conversation we go into around some of these topics about leadership and culture and all that kind of stuff. And we've gotten into it a little bit on a couple of your shows, but there are so many different paths you can take to explore these topics and why they're important and how you bring them to life. And so that's kind of the goal for today. And
Awesome.
You know, one of the things that you're very well known for in the industry is culture. You know, culture is often a very overused word. It's
Absolutely.
also often a very under-leveraged word. And I've shared a bit about it in different episodes with different folks on this podcast so far. But before we even get into what culture is and how we define it, let's set the stakes a little bit. Like, why specifically in manufacturing and adjacent industries that operate like manufacturing, where we've got a lot of technicians, a lot of people in the operating world, if you will. Like, why does culture matter? Why is it important?
So I would argue that culture matters more in skilled trades, in the crafts, right? Where you're making something, where you're walking away at the end of the day, you can stand there and say, I made that, right? It matters more, maybe just to me, maybe I'm wrong, but because those people can take those skills anywhere, right? And if you don't have the right culture for that person, for that skilled whatever, whether it's a carpenter or somebody laying concrete or a machinist or welder or whatever that trade is, hair, doing hair, that's a trade. Nursing, that's a trade, right? Those makers, those doers, they can take those skills anywhere. If you don't have the culture for them, then they'll take it down the road. And you don't want them in any of those industries to take their skill set elsewhere. We're already having a hard enough time finding the right people and getting that knowledge transfer to happen. To have the right culture for the people who are on your floor in any trade is super important.
Man, I could talk about that for hours, because it's the intangible thing. Everybody points to the reason people are leaving is because they got money somewhere, or maybe they got a better shift, or they got more perks and benefits. But I like to tell people, if you think about it, if you think about the worker in terms of Maslow's hierarchy, all that stuff I just listed off are the bottom couple tiers.
Absolutely.
So that's the stuff, like, yes, that might be why they accepted a role, but it isn't why they started looking.
Right.
They
It's
started
not
looking
what
because of the stuff on the top of the pyramid.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what you're getting
It's
at.
why they're
Yeah.
open to taking a phone call from a
Yeah.
recruiter, right? Or a lot of times these craftspeople, they're not even out there looking for a new job, right? They're just that good, and they get a phone call because somebody who used to work with them now works at company X, and company X's HR or owner or leader or whatever dials them up and says, "Hey, John Boy over here just told me that you were a stellar welder. Do you want to come over here and weld for us?"
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about it. What's it like there? Right. And that opens the door. The dollar an hour, the 50 cents an hour, whatever it is that they're making more, that's inconsequential. They were open to the phone call. If they felt comfortable, if they felt like the culture was what they needed, they would have picked up the phone and said, "Thanks for calling. I'm not interested. I love where I'm at." Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And what's so interesting, I learned this the hard way when I was in the aerospace industry, is so you have a probably, I would say about 20% of your workers are that category you just explained. They're the cream of the crop and they can take their skill elsewhere. The other, I think about 80%, is you've got people that they don't really care what they're doing. They just want to get paid.
Yeah.
And so if that's working in composites, if that's welding, it really doesn't matter what they have a skill in. If Amazon's going to pay them $1 more an hour to go pack boxes down the street, and you don't have a compelling reason that competes with that $1 more an hour, even though you can't compete with it financially, they're gone. And that's going to be something, I think, especially with automation, where we're only going to require even more skills for all these people, that a lot of smaller, mid-size, even larger companies, lesser known companies that maybe don't have the sex appeal, are going to have to really battle with over these next few years. So why does this matter to you? Like, you were so passionate. We both are, right? And we've had these conversations so many times. What about your experience? What about your upbringing? What led you to become the version of Jim that said, "I'm going to create the Manufacturing Culture Podcast because I believe it's that important to have conversations about"?
The podcast I started on a dare, but I'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah.
So I grew up in a household where my dad was a teacher, my mom was a career counselor, right? And when I say career counselor, for adults, right? She was a coach.
Yeah.
And so I grew up in a household that celebrated the world of work from an early age. And I went through high school and I had very mid grades because I didn't do homework, man. But I was just telling my son last night the story about my senior year where I had 4 hours of classes and 2 of them were wood shop and metal shop. And my grades were never higher because it was like marketing, wood shop, metal shop, and jewelry making were my classes my senior year. And then I'd go off and do my work study, right?
Good for you.
So manufacturing skills boosted by GPA to be accepted into, right? But I should have listened to my parents and gone through a trade program. I went to university, dropped out. Long story.
Yeah.
But I started working in the skilled trades about 26 years ago. I worked building houses, fell off too many roofs, got into industrial distribution, which is when I walked into my first machine shop as a professional.
Yeah.
I fell in love with the place. It was the most magical place I'd ever walked into. The sights, the smells, the sounds, but more importantly, the people that were there were just phenomenal. They were my people. I was home. And so I built this career in industrial distribution and then working for OEMs like Keyence and Big Kaiser, and then working for NTMA, National Tooling and Machining Association. And the common thread was always manufacturing. I had gone back to school at the age of 30, 12 years a little later than other people, right? Did my undergrad, rolled that into a graduate program, which is where I focused on organizational development and
Mm.
executive leadership. And suddenly it became clear why I had been leaving jobs. It was culture, right? All of a sudden it became clear to me why I was hearing these owners in shops talk about not being able to find people. It was
Yeah.
culture. And at the same time, all these platforms were releasing employee engagement. Aon Hewitt and all of these large organizations were measuring employee sentiment, but the commonality was that employee sentiment was directed at people who sat behind desks and computers. Nobody seemed to care about deskless employees. So my capstone project was a talent management and employee engagement framework for deskless employees, for skilled trades. And I was able to start to connect the dots, Maslow's hierarchy, other areas of the world, why people truly were not satisfied in companies. And there's such low-hanging fruit on why they can stay. What
Yeah.
those reasons that you talk about on why they can stay, those compelling reasons. And so to get back to your actual question, the reason I'm so passionate, these are my people. These are people who make things. I still look back at houses that I've built and I'm proud of what I've built. I
Yeah.
don't look at that pride as sin, right? Or
Yeah.
a bad thing. I've created something. I can show my kids something that I have built and I'm proud of that. And
Right.
the people in this industry are proud of what they make. I've never heard a machinist say, I'm the second best machinist in the world. But I've always heard them say, I am the best machinist in the world. Whether they
That's
are
right.
or not, right?
That's right.
They are always the best. And there's pride that comes with it. And so these are my people. And I want them to have the workplace that they deserve and that they want. And that's the only way we're going to rebuild this industrial base.
That's so good. I mean, they say when you're in the process of building a business, so often you're trying to help and serve the person you once were, right?
Yeah.
That's why I'm doing what I'm doing with
Yeah.
this podcast and how I'm helping people is exactly what you're doing. Like, for me, I was a 23-year-old platoon leader in the United States Army that thought he had the world figured out as an Apache pilot and fell flat on his face when he tried to lead people
Yep.
because he didn't realize it wasn't about him.
Yep.
And that there were so many things he had to work on to become the person that could actually have influence regardless of what his professional title was. That's so good. So, all right, let's get into this idea of culture because everybody's got a different. If you ask 100 people, you're going to get 100 different responses as to what culture is, right? So when you strip away all the posters, the mission statements on the wall, whatever the GM or plant leader or CEO wants the culture to be, what actually is culture? Like, how do you define it?
And I love that you said you ask 100 people, you're going to get 100 different answers. I have literally asked on the Manufacturing Culture podcast now 100 people what their definition of culture is, and I have 100 different answers. There are some common themes that have come from guests, right? That feeling you have on Sunday night is something that a lot of people have said, right? To me, the definition of culture boils down to an alignment of values between an organization and the employees that work there, and how they then take those values and act, behave, and treat each other, right? So if you don't have that defined set of values, and I'm not saying like inspiration and innovation and collaborate, because those are meaningless just terms by themselves, right? But when you put something true about what you believe in and what you stand for behind those words of innovation and collaboration and trust and teamwork and all those things that you see on walls, then people start behaving in a way towards each other, towards the organization, towards the customers, towards the community that reflects those values. that's when you get the culture that you are truly looking for and intending to have within your facility.
That's good. One of the things when I talk about principles and values, I like to relate it to how aerodynamics serve as a foundation for everything that exists in aerospace and aviation today.
Got
Like without understanding aerodynamics, you can't build a plane.
it.
You know what I mean? Well, without understanding the principles and values that you want to guide, whether it's your personal life, your organization, or how those two work together, because, I know work-life balance is a thing, but it's really not, right?
Right.
Like we just live one life that we happen to work in.
All right.
And so these things have to integrate with each other. Yeah, like it has to one thing has to feed the other. So, and I think that's a perfect segue because so often, I hear people talk about what culture is and why it's important. And it like tends to be a very, we'll call it like artistic conversation, right? It's a feel good conversation.
Right.
We're saying it's almost a political conversation sometimes,
is.
right? Like saying these things because I have to say it, right? Like people are important, people
Yep.
matter, right? This is our mission, whatever it might be. But I think culture is important not because of us saying it's important, but because once we define whatever version of culture we want to create and whatever definition of culture we want to use to create and define whatever that version of culture is, it serves as an anchor point for us to then actually design and lead and do so many other things with the organization from a senior leader's perspective that we want to accomplish. We talk a lot about when you're driving and you need to use a GPS, there are two inputs that you need. You need to know where you want to go, but you also need to know where you are. And so then the follow-on question is, if this is how we're defining culture, and you kind of got into this a little bit with principles and values, well, how do you then go ahead and say, well, if this is the culture I want, how do I bring it to life?
Great question. So, and let me be clear, in my world, there's no such thing as a bad culture, right?
Mm,
There are cultures that I'm not aligned with the values of that organization. Every individual has their own values, from ownership to the person pushing the broom on the floor, right?
right,
Filling the coolant tanks, whatever role is, the bottom of the totem pole for an organization. An organization's values are typically steered by the owner or president's values themselves, right?
right,
That is where that comes into play. As a frontline employee, if I don't believe in the same things that that owner does, I'm going to find it to be a very toxic environment for
right,
me. But that doesn't mean that Craig Coyle, not saying we have different values, but that doesn't mean that Craig Coyle can't go in there and thrive in a culture
right,
like that, right?
right,
We're individuals. You and I have I've walked into shops that I cringe at the culture, but they have very low turnover for
yeah,
them because they target the kind of people that work well there.
right. Yeah. So just a quick question on that, because there's something interesting that you said. You said that, through the lens of how you view culture, there's really no bad culture. But what I'm hearing there is that there's an assumption that that culture was designed through intentional principles and values. What would you say to maybe, because in my view, there are two types of cultures. There are intentional cultures, and there are cultures that exist, but they don't exist because they've been intentionally designed to exist a certain way. Like,
Sure.
what's your thought? What's your perspective on that?
Every organization has a culture.
That's right.
It's whether it's intentionally built or not, right? I tend to gravitate to cultures that align with my values,
Mhm.
whether those are defined or not by the organization.
Yeah.
I've worked for organizations that were very, very bad at intentionally building their culture. I am not naming names on your show, Craig, but they were some of my favorite jobs because I loved, respected, and connected with the owner and their top level leadership on the values that they had. So they
Mm.
may not have an explicitly built out culture or put words on a wall. These are what we stand for. But in conversation, those values came out. The way
Yeah.
they treated their people, their values came out, the way they behaved. So I will say that sometimes unintentional culture is better than intentional culture, because
Yeah.
when you intentionally build something around values, you have to live up to those, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know, man. I think that when I started my company, when I started my consulting company, I came into this thinking that I knew what a good culture was. And my mission was to help people build that culture. And I failed spectacularly, man. And you've been a friend of mine throughout a lot of this journey, and you've
Yeah.
seen multiple pivots and stabs at this and all of that kind of fun stuff. There is no magic wand when it comes to culture. There isn't like a one size fits all, business book that you can read and all of a sudden your cultural needs are solved, right?
Yeah.
If you're going to do it intentionally, build it with the people that you want it to serve. If you
Yeah.
do it unintentionally, behave in a way that reflects what you believe in, and you'll have the culture that you want.
I think to your point, you could go as far to argue that even if maybe it's not so deliberate as to be principles and values and a mission that's painted on the wall, it could still be incredibly intentional if it's showing up in how senior leadership is acting I would argue that's more intentional because you see and we've both been in worlds where the mission is on the wall, right?
Right.
And the senior leadership is saying all the right things, right? Like we care about our people, and you walk into the lobby and it's all about people, 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 right? But then you
Yeah.
walk on the floor and what's actually lived out and the experience people are actually having is completely different.
Yep.
We've both been in shops that, nothing like that is
Yeah.
boldly expressed when you walk in the place. But the lived
Absolutely.
experience is completely different. The lived experience is people being valued, is people being taken care of, people putting their family first. Maybe it's putting their faith first. Maybe
Yep.
it's all these other things.
Craig, real quick, when you walk onto the floor, I've got my own litmus test, what I look for when I walk onto a floor, but I want to
Mhm.
hear yours because that's a question I've not asked you in 2 previous recordings. When you walk onto a shop floor, what's the first indicator that you look for? Cultural engagement, leadership style, etc.
Yeah. So, that's perfect. So the way I look at culture is I believe your culture is a lag measure.
Okay.
And what I mean by lag measure is it's the expression of the environment and the relationships and the purpose that is being put into these four walls and the
Sure.
people that exist within them. And so the first thing I'm looking at is I'm just observing how people act with one another. So
Got it.
it's one, how they relate with one another, whether it's peer to peer or peer to supervisor, and then two, it's how they're engaging with their work. Because I mean, you can have a culture where everybody loves each other and we're all best friends, but if we're not moving the needle and we're not accomplishing the job, what is that culture doing for you?
Right.
Right? I mean, we're in business for a reason. So we're getting paid to be leaders for a reason, right? It's not just to it's not just to have a daycare,
Right.
an adult daycare is actually to produce results. And when you produce results and people are passionate about what they're doing and they're working with other people in a way that brings the best out of everybody, well, then you're getting into what I would argue is the world of a good, productive, healthy, efficient organization and culture. But yeah, and there's a lot of things that go like that is not an easy thing to bring about.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah,
Absolutely. I look for 3 things when I walk onto a shop floor that I look for. First, are we recognizing and communicating? Is there a women's bathroom? And do people look at me when I walk in the door, or are they focused on their work and or their shoes? Those 3 things will tell me everything I need to know about an organization and how I steer that conversation.
Oh, that's so good. That's so good. Okay, we're going to shift a little bit from talking about culture to talking about how to create and bring about the culture that maybe you want to create. So when you say you're working with an organization or you're a part of an organization, senior leadership in an organization, and you've identified that the culture that you want to create in your world is maybe a little different from the one that you're actually seeing. If you were in that role or if you were helping someone in that role, what would you say? How do you bring about that change? It's not going to happen overnight, but what would be the practical steps that you would say, hey, consider taking these steps to bring about change?
First thing I would do is determine who on the floor, which employees can help you build what you're looking to build, right? Change is not going to happen in a top-down mandate. People love change. People love change more than maybe anything else. People love change because if we didn't love change, there would be no fashion industry. There would be no restaurant industry. There would be no travel industry. People love change that they are able to influence, that they have the ability to shape and be a part of. So if you want to change the culture because you're seeing a gap between your desired state culturally and your current state culturally, then you need to involve the people who are going to need to help you make that change, or else you'll fail because it's just another bright, shiny thing from a consultant that means nothing on the impact of the people on the floor. So that's where I would start. Where do you start?
Yeah, I 100% agree. And that's why this show is called the Frontline Leadership Podcast, because sometimes we overlook the power, not the power that just one single supervisor has, but when you think about the collective influence an entire cohort of frontline leaders and managers have on an organization. I mean, they are the daily interaction and touch point for 70 to 80% of most manufacturers. And they're the ones that are either intentionally creating a relationship with the folks they lead and therefore creating whatever type of culture you want based off how you empower them to do that, or they're going about the best way they know how, which is probably the example they've gotten, which is probably from a leader who probably never got taught how to do these things the right way. And then the result is going to be whatever culture kind of cultivates from that. I like to think of it almost like a garden, right? Like
Yeah.
if you don't ever landscape your yard, you will still have things grow, right? You will still have culture. It's just not going to be the stuff you want growing,
Absolutely.
right? If you want a really nice lawn, guess what you got to do? You got to invest time into it. You got to nurture it.
You
You
got
got
to
to
water.
grow it.
Yeah.
You got to take care of the soil, right? And that's my favorite analogy for it.
No, I love that. And when my company was built around consulting, there's the whip, there's a carrot, and then there's the growth, right? And the whip and the carrot don't work because they both reinforce poor behavior. But if you
Yeah.
cultivate it, if you grow it from within, it's a completely different environment, right?
Mhm.
There's no poor behaviors that you're reinforcing either with the whip or the carrot. You're cultivating something from internal that can really change the dynamic of
Yeah.
the world.
Yeah. So how does a senior leader effectively move forward within that environment? If they understand, like, okay, my culture is a reflection of what's going on the floor, what steps does the senior leader take? Because they're usually 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 orders removed. What would you recommend there?
So what I usually have done is that's when I get senior leadership frontline in a room and put up whatever values they say they believe in.
Yeah.
And I ask both sides in front of each other, is this real? And if it's not real, then that's where we start. If
Yeah.
it is real, then how do we start acting on this? How do we start believing on this? But right, but it's a collaboration. It's every level within an organization. Can't just be the leadership team, can't just be top line leadership, can't just be frontline leadership or frontline employees. It's got to be a true mixture of everybody within the facility. Because if you want people to row together, you've got to give them all the same opportunity to build an oar.
I think one of the best, I mean, this is change, right? It's just cultural change, but one of the best descriptions I've ever heard of change is change can begin as an idea from the top, but it doesn't get implemented from top down.
Right.
So the senior leader, if they want to bring about change in an organization, they effectively have to go on a campaign to get buy-in from the front line for then change to come up the organization. Well, Jim, let's land the plane here, because I think this is a topic that typically you have to be invested in it, right? You have to have faith, you have to have belief, you have to know that the stuff I'm doing today, no one's probably forcing me to do. It's not going to have a tangible impact in my bottom line tomorrow. And it's probably not going to have a significant tangible impact for the next 12 months. And it's going to be small things that you're probably not even going to notice until someone pulls you aside 12 months from now and says, hey, look at the difference, right? In these measurable statistics. But with that in mind, for the senior leaders listening, or maybe even for the frontline leaders listening, the new leaders, what is one thing that you would tell them? If there's one thing they can do to start to improve in this idea of building and bringing about a culture that they're intentionally designing and creating, if you can focus on this for the next 30 days, you're going to be in a good spot, and then can build off that the next 30 days after that.
I would have people start by walking around and just asking questions like, how do you feel about working here? Does the work you do make you feel proud? Right? When you start asking those questions, it changes that dynamic. My company now does almost zero consulting. I have one consulting client I've told you that won't let me fire them.
It's a good problem to have.
It is. But the majority of my work now is helping companies tell their cultural story, tell their story, right? And I do it through a very human lens. It's about manufacturing, not for manufacturing. I don't star in any of these videos. I am just the guy who asks questions behind a camera. I've had a client now, we made a documentary, and it took us 3 months to film. We filmed 1 day a month for 3 months. And so many like golden nuggets came out of that. In 30 years, it's the first time nobody left over a 3-month period of time.
Wow.
Like voluntarily left. There were terminations, but that, the voluntary self-terms, none. Nobody quit. I've had employees there say, this is the first time anybody asked me why I'm proud to do what I do. This is the first time I've felt seen. I'm so excited to see this because I can't wait to show my kids or my spouse or my grandma or my dad or my, pinnacle club, or I don't even know, is it a league or a club? But that level of pride, right? When you start walking your floor and you ask people what they're proud to do for you as their leader, they'll tell you. Start there. Because if they struggle to come up with something, that tells you everything you're going to need to know.
That's so good. There's an episode I'm working on at the time we're recording this. It will be published by the time this episode comes out. But it's all about, as a leader, how do you communicate in a way that invites your team into a story that they care about? And part of the challenge and part of the reason why I say that culture is a function of relationships and purpose is because that purpose piece, it helps people feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves. And when they feel that, it doesn't have to be crazy. It doesn't have to be world changing. It just has to have a meaningful impact in the world they live in. And that makes them feel like they're a part of a story. And we communicate, we live, we get entertained through stories. That's what a powerful way to end this episode, Jim. I appreciate you sharing that. So for people that want to get connected with you and learn more about your work, learn more about how you help them shape and craft that story, not just for marketing, but to market to their people and do these things we're talking about, where can people find you?
LinkedIn is typically the best way. I'm in a copper bathtub of orange ping pong balls from IMTS in 2018. Probably need to update that. Maybe I'll go back to Spin this year and get an updated photo in that bathtub. But Jim Mayer on LinkedIn, or they can go to themfgconnector.com. It's a really simple, easy website, and there's a contact us button or a chat in the bottom, and I'm the one who answers the chat. So it's not a bot. So if I'm late in responding, that's why. So that's typically the easiest way to get a hold of me.
Love it. Well, Jim, I always love our conversations. It's always great to connect with you and just to share what we're so passionate about with the world. So thanks for joining me on the Frontline Leadership Podcast.
Thank you. What you're doing here is awesome.
Wow. Well, Jim is one of my favorite humans on the planet. He's so passionate. He's so thoughtful. And it's just an honor to be able to share a conversation with him, with you all today. And look, culture is something we're going to continue to come back to over and over on the show. And we're going to continue to come back to it because it doesn't only have measurable impact in your organization and how you're able to sustain the performance that you need to be able to sustain to grow your organization, but it's easily designed. There are tried and true methods to help you create the culture that creates the outcomes that you want to create. And I hope this conversation and the conversations we've had about culture previously are helping you chart the way to do that in whatever world you live in today. Jim, thanks again for joining me on today's podcast episode and for sharing this conversation with the world. Until the next episode, I'm Craig Coyle, and this is the Frontline Leadership Podcast. Let's lead.